Imagine you're a German soldier in occupied Paris in 1941. You're using your nearly worthless occupation currency, set at an outrageous exchange rate, to buy silk stockings and fine wine to send back home. You are a conqueror. Now imagine you're a child in the Warsaw Ghetto. Your daily food ration is 184 calories, less than a tenth of what you need to survive. You slip through a hole in the ghetto wall, risking being shot on sight, to smuggle back a single potato. You are a survivor. Both of these lives are happening at the same time, under the same Nazi occupation. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're moving beyond the epic battles of World War II to explore the hidden world of everyday life in Nazi-controlled Europe. This is the story of how millions of ordinary people fought not only for their lives, but for their very humanity. First, we need to understand how quickly the Nazi shadow fell across the continent. Starting in 1939, Germany's new Lightning War, or Blitzkrieg, shattered European armies in a matter of weeks. Poland was crushed and partitioned. Then, in 1940, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France all fell in a stunningly rapid campaign. But Nazi occupation wasn't a one-size-fits-all system. It was brutally organized according to Nazi racial ideology. At the top were Germanic peoples in countries like the Netherlands and Norway. The Nazis saw them as racially valuable and tried to re-educate them into the new order through civilian administrations. The initial occupation was deceptively correct, but this illusion soon shattered. In the middle were territories of strategic importance, like northern France and Belgium, ruled by the military. The main goal here was maintaining order and plundering resources for the German war machine. But at the very bottom of this hierarchy were the peoples of Eastern Europe, the Poles, and the citizens of the Soviet Union. The Nazis considered them Untermenschen, or subhumans. Their lands were destined to become Lebensraum, or living space, for German settlers. The plan here was not just occupation, it was extermination and enslavement on a scale that chills the bone. This racial hierarchy determined everything. It determined who ate and who starved, who worked and who was enslaved, and ultimately who lived and who died. At its core, the Nazi occupation was a system of organized plunder. The primary goal was to strip every conquered land of its food, its resources, and its industrial might to fuel the German war effort. One of the most direct methods was forcing countries to pay for their own occupation. These occupation costs were set at absurdly high levels. France, for example, had to pay 400 million francs per day. This effectively meant the French were paying for the Germans to loot their own country. German soldiers were paid in special currency they could only spend in occupied lands, at a rigged exchange rate. This turned them into an army of shoppers, earning them the nickname the Colorado Beatles in Paris as they bought up all the luxury goods. The direct result of this plunder was constant, gnawing hunger for everyone else. Life became ruled by the ration card, a little booklet of coupons that dictated what you were legally allowed to eat. In Western Europe, official rations hovered around 1,200 to 1,500 calories a day, barely enough to subsist. In Poland, rations were set at starvation levels of just 600 calories. For Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, it was a death sentence of less than 200. The scarcity of real food led to a culture of ersatz, or substitute goods. Coffee was made from roasted acorns. Bread was bulked out with sawdust. Sausages contained almost no meat. To survive, millions of people had to turn to the black market, known in France as Système D, for the need to get by. This illicit economy became a parallel world where anything was available, for a price. A single kilogram of butter on the Paris black market could cost a worker a full week's wages. Ordinary city dwellers made dangerous trips to the countryside to barter with farmers for a few eggs or a sack of potatoes. But the most desperate and brave participants were the smugglers of the Warsaw Ghetto. It's estimated that 80% of the food consumed there was smuggled in. Much of this was done by children, small enough to slip through holes in the ghetto wall. They weren't just breaking the law. They were engaged in a life-and-death struggle against a system designed to starve them into oblivion. The Nazi war wasn't just for territory and food, it was a war for the mind. They aimed to control all culture and knowledge, to force everyone into line with their ideology. They took over radio stations and newspapers, replacing news with a constant stream of propaganda. Listening to the BBC from London became a forbidden act of defiance. Families would huddle around hidden radios, the opening notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, V for Victory, a secret symbol of hope. The Nazis purged libraries of books by Jewish, liberal, or degenerate authors. Theaters were censored. Education was a primary target. In Western Europe, curricula were revised. In the East, the goal was far more sinister. Himmler declared that Polish children should learn little more than how to write their name and obey Germans. Universities and high schools were shut down entirely. The goal was to create a generation of slaves. But this assault was met with one of the most incredible acts of intellectual resistance of the war, Poland's secret education system. What started as small groups of teachers and students meeting in secret blossomed into a nationwide underground network. It was called the Tajne Nauczanie, or secret teaching. This system provided a complete education, from primary school all the way up to secret universities. In Warsaw, professors and students of the secret university met in constantly shifting groups, in basements and private apartments. A young Karol Wojtyla, the future Pope John Paul II, was one of its students. By 1944, nearly 100,000 students were enrolled in this secret system. Discovery meant a concentration camp or execution, but it was a declaration that Polish culture would not be extinguished. Resistance also took smaller symbolic forms. In occupied Paris, a youth subculture called the Zazus showed their contempt for the Nazis by wearing outlandish clothing and fervently listening to forbidden American jazz music. In Norway, people began wearing a simple paperclip on their lapel. It was a silent, clever signal that meant we are bound together in solidarity against the occupiers. The Germans eventually banned the wearing of paperclips, but it showed how even the smallest object could become a powerful weapon in the war for the soul. Life under occupation forced people into a complex moral world, what survivor Primo Levi called the gray zone, where the lines between right and wrong were tragically blurred. Behavior existed on a wide spectrum, from collaboration to resistance, with most people living somewhere in between. Collaboration took many forms. There was state collaboration, like Marshal Petain's Vichy government in France, which actively helped the Nazis, even using French police to round up over 13,000 Jews in Paris. Then there was ideological collaboration from fascist movements like Vidkun Quisling's party in Norway, whose name became a synonym for traitor. Many collaborated for personal gain, while others were drawn into so-called horizontal collaboration, women who formed relationships with German soldiers as a means of survival, only to face brutal public humiliation after the war. Resistance was just as varied. It grew from small, scattered acts of propaganda into large, organized movements. Resistance networks provided the Allies with vital intelligence. They ran perilous escape lines, like the Comet Line, to smuggle downed airmen to safety. They carried out acts of sabotage, blowing up bridges and derailing German supply trains. And in places like Yugoslavia and Poland, resistance became an all-out guerrilla war. The Polish Home Army was the largest single resistance organization in Europe, culminating in the tragic Warsaw Uprising of 1944. But for the vast majority of the population, the main strategy was attentism, a wait-and-see approach. They kept their heads down and focused on the daily struggle to find food and keep their families safe. They weren't heroes or villains, but ordinary people trying to survive in an extraordinary time. While all occupied peoples suffered, the experience of Europe's Jews was a unique and unparalleled horror. For them, occupation was not just oppression, it was a methodical, step-by-step path to annihilation. The Holocaust was a central goal of the Nazi regime. First came definition and segregation. Jews were forced to register and wear the yellow Star of David, a visible mark of shame and a target for violence. Then came Aryanization. the systematic theft of all Jewish businesses, homes, and property. In Eastern Europe, this was followed by ghettoization. Jews were herded into overcrowded, sealed-off districts where starvation and disease were used as weapons. Then, starting in 1941, came the mass murder. In the East, the SS Einsatzgruppen, or mobile killing squads, shot over 1.5 million Jewish men, women, and children in what's known as the Holocaust by bullets. But this was deemed too inefficient. At the Wannsee Conference in 1942, the Nazis formalized the final solution, the industrial-scale extermination of all 11 million Jews in Europe. They built dedicated death camps in occupied Poland, factories of death like Auschwitz-Birkenau. From all over Europe, Jews were deported in sealed cattle cars. Most were sent directly to the gas chambers upon arrival. But even in the face of this absolute evil, there was resistance. There was the incredible Oneg Shabbat archive, a secret project in the Warsaw Ghetto to document every detail of Jewish life and death, burying the truth in milk cans so the world would know what happened. And there was armed resistance, most famously the Warsaw Ghetto uprising of 1943. A few hundred young fighters held off the SS for almost a month, choosing to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. Their struggle remains one of the most profound acts of courage in human history. The years of occupation left a permanent scar on Europe. Liberation brought joy, but also a wave of brutal vengeance against collaborators. The continent was in ruins, its economy shattered, its population traumatized. The memory of this time, the myths of universal resistance, the shame of collaboration, and the horror of the Holocaust continues to shape European identity today. The story of occupied lives is a deeply human one, a cautionary tale about the fragility of democracy and the moral compromises people make under extreme pressure. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the struggle for dignity, knowledge, and freedom can never be completely extinguished. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.